Greetings, everyone. I was so pleased to have been asked by the staff at CAC Living School to share with you some reflections on depression. And I'm going to begin first by briefly, because in my understanding of this, going in, as a psychotherapist who work with trauma and depression, I want to speak just a little bit about it psychologically, about the diagnosis of depression, the different forms it can take. But in the short time available, my emphasis is going to be on the spiritual dimensions of the healing of depression. And I'll be focusing on that. So I'll get started with that, with the diagnostic psychological part first, and then I'll segue into the spiritual part. Is that, in my task as a psychotherapist working with trauma, my task has been to diagnose, assess, and treat psychological symptoms that embody suffering. And in that category, one of the most common categories of mental disorders and things that impair our sense of feeling whole and free and healed in our own life are the mood disorders, primarily anxiety and depression. So I want to share with you just some brief sense of depression. And if you care to pursue this further, if on Google, if you put in DSM for Diagnostic Statistical Manual, DSM depression, you'll find a lot of information there. There's just so much information out there. Just know depression. So this is going to be a very brief kind of snapshot of some main factors in depression. And I want to begin first with the milder form of depression, which is dysthymia. And dysthymia, the signs, the symptoms for dysthymia, the categories are a person, there's a persistent pattern of sadness, or a persistent pattern of feeling empty or feeling of hopelessness that has been present for at least 2 years. So it's a long, slow, kind of underlying, kind of chronic kind of feeling, like a gray cloud over your head. And in addition to feeling sad and also to feeling empty inside, the people often feel that there's a feeling of low energy. There's feeling tired. Also changes of appetite, usually a loss of appetite, but it can also be overeating. It can also be disturbance in sleep, either wanting to sleep all the time, usually, or not being able to sleep. And these depressed moods, they last for most of the day. And they're always there for at least 2 hours a day. So it's this chronic, low-grade, ongoing, long-standing feelings of depression, sadness, emptiness, loneliness, and so on. Also associated with it are feelings of low self-esteem, like I don't matter, I don't count, I'm less than, and also difficulty concentrating and problem solving. And the symptoms can go away for a couple months at a time, but they tend to come back again. So this is dysthymic disorder, persistent depressive disorder. And it responds well to treatment. It tends to respond very well to treatment, and usually the treatment consists, the optimal is the combination between talk therapy and medications. The talk therapy is to be with someone in whose presence you can engage with, and they engage you, and they can see a value or a worth in you in the midst of your depression. They see that you are not what's wrong with you. There is this, that you're laboring under this burden, and you can be free from it through talk therapy, through the alliance with the therapist. You can form a bond to find your way out. And it often happens, too, that it's not just psychological, but psychiatric. That is, it has to do with how the brain is processing neurotransmitters in the brain. And so very often it's antidepressants, medication with the talk therapy. Almost always is the best optimal strategy. And a person can can work it through, and there's other factors involved. But very often there's a fairly high success rate in being able to move out and beyond all that. For some people with dysthymia, they've been dysthymic for so long they don't know they're mildly depressed. They're so used to it. And in Winnie the Pooh, Eeyore, the donkey, oh bother. Oh, Eeyore has dysthymic disorder. It's a chronic underlying moaning sigh about finding it very difficult to be happy like this, dysthymic disorder. It increases with intensity with major depression. And so depression, clinical depression, is the same symptoms, but with increasing intensity and increasing impairment. And so the signs in the DSM for the diagnostic criteria for depression is a depressed mood for most of the day, nearly every day, marked diminished interest in pleasure, ahedonia, difficulty being pleasured by things. So there's something inherently pleasurable, but you're not pleasured by it. Something inherently enjoyable, and you're not enjoying it. Like nothing breaks through this depressive block. Also in a disturbance in appetite. That's why anyone with major depression, you always ask them how much weight they've lost as another indicator, because they just don't want to eat. They don't enjoy food, they don't care to eat. Another big problem with major depression, you can see these problems are there, but you don't care. That's the thing, you're not able to care about yourself, to be motivated by it. But it can also be agitated depression, where you eat more than you do. Likewise with sleep, either you have a difficulty getting to sleep, or you have a fitful sleep, where you wake up in the middle of the night, you can't get back to sleep. So energy and sleep and appetite, along with this underlying sadness, pervasive sadness, and not being able to feel happy. Also difficulty also intensifies the inability to concentrate and to do problem solving, like your mind is clouded, you can't find your way to details. Feelings of chronic exhaustion, also feelings of worthlessness, that you don't matter or you don't count, and it's very often linked up with shame. That's why they're secret about it, that you don't want to, because you feel ashamed about being this way. And also concerned you can't find your way out, and a feeling of hopelessness. You just can't see any way where this is going to get better. And therefore often with it, reoccurrent thoughts of death. And this is why the critical thing with major depression is the high correlation between major depression and suicidality. So anytime anyone's reporting these symptoms like this, there's three key questions. One question, do you ever have thoughts about harming yourself? That is, do you have suicidal ideation? The second question, do you ever want to do it? So is there suicidal intention? And the third question is, do you have a plan? And therefore you assess the lethality of the plan. And insofar as these three signs show that the person's at risk, there's no confidentiality at this point in the therapy. And your goal, they're at risk to themselves. They're risk to themselves. So who's their healthcare provider? What family members know about this? Do they need to be taken to the hospital? Whatever, because you're trying to prevent them from harming themselves and taking their own life. And there's different strategies around that. So that's dealing with major depression like this. And there's other factors in this also. Insofar as there's already kind of shaky ego strength in a person, they just don't feel inner strength within themselves. If they use mood-altering substances, if they drink, because alcohol lowers impulse control. Also, if there's no support system, if they have no support system, and then there's no one there to support them and to be there for them in this. With these factors, it can really contribute to the risk factor to the person. And but again, if the person gets therapy, if it's correctly diagnosed, the person stays in their therapy, the person stays on the medication regimen, there's truly deep and real healing from major depression. A person can come out of it, and it goes with different people, different ways, but that's depression. See, that's major depression. So, and it's fairly common too, in varying degrees, especially dysthymia. the major depressive episodes. And probably for all of us, there's been times in our life we've been depressed. We can look back at a moment where we were in the middle of a depression. So it's worth to just be very aware of it like this. So there's a lot more we could go on and on like this, but now I want to go to the spiritual part on this, on how can spirituality be a resource in the healing of depression. So first, here's some images that help me with it. Imagine you draw a horizontal line, and on the horizontal line, this is our experience of ourself and our passage through time from birth to death. So this is our human experience going through our life. And as we go through life, we seek to experience happiness, fulfillment, security for ourselves and others, which creates a feeling of well-being and a feeling of gratitude. But likewise, life is such that we're not always able to live in conditions conducive to happiness. And there can be traumatizations, there can be betrayals, there can be loss, there can be injustices, there can be that take their toll. And we can withstand anything as long as the center holds. It gets real scary when these invasive, hurtful, threatening energies that are going on in our life around us start getting near the center, and we start to lose our balance, and we start to lose ourselves into a state of crisis like this. And the spiritual dimension is this. We now draw a vertical line intersecting right in the middle of the horizontal line. And the vertical line is the divine dimension. So in its depths, this is divinity, God, the holy, like the sacred. And the holy is welling up. We would say in Judeo-Christian language that the infinite love of God is welling up and presencing itself and pouring itself out as our life on the horizontal line. This is the God-given godly nature of every breath and heartbeat. The sun moving across the sky, breathing in and breathing out. The miracle of being alive and real in the world. And religious experience is the experience of that. To taste it, to realize it, and how it illumines us on the horizontal line by following a path of faith and reassurance. And the difficulty is that as depression increases, it closes off experiential access to the upwelling of God's presence in our life. So if we have religious faith, in depression, it doesn't mean anything to you anymore. It ceases to be relevant. So not only have you lost your own way in your own life, but you've also lost the felt sense of God being present in your life. And it radicalizes the sense of loss and things. So a lot of therapy then, it isn't just moving along the horizontal line for symptom reduction, it is that. But doing it in such a way that it starts to open up the depth dimension, where it can come welling up, and something of the depth dimension can begin to shine through in your dilemma. So it isn't just that you're caught in the middle of a dilemma, but you know you're not alone in the dilemma. There is this felt sense. And I want to give one example of this. There's a Carl Rogers, a very well-known approach to therapy of client-centered therapy. And Carl Rogers is a Rogerian triad. So the therapist sits with the patient in therapy with the 3 points of a triangle. The first is unconditional positive regard. The therapist lets the person know no matter what you share with me about yourself, it will not diminish my deep respect for who you are as a human being. And little by little by little, the therapist's deep respect for you and unconditional positive regard can transfer over and start becoming your renewed sense of unconditional positive regard for yourself. You internalize it. The second point of the triangle is empathy. So I hear you saying, and you say it back, but they say it back in such a way you know they heard you. And when you know that you've been heard, and you know that, and there's interpretive empathy, not just heard, but you're understood. And that can deepen your capacity to hear yourself and understand yourself and to have empathy with yourself. And self-congruence is that the therapist is always honest with you. See? in a respectful way. So the therapist might say, quite honestly, I'm concerned about you when you talk like this. I'm really concerned about where you are. I think it's so important for you to find resources. And in that kind of compassionate honesty, you learn to be honest with yourself. And little by little by little, that's why I say, when we risk sharing what hurts the most in the presence of someone who will not invade us or abandon us, we can learn not to invade or abandon ourselves. In the alliance with the clinician, you can be reparented in love. You can be reparented in love. And out of that alliance, you can internalize it. It becomes more and more stable in your life to the point that you move on with your life. So what I'm suggesting is this: if we take the 3 points of the triad and lay it flat on the ground and draw 3 lines down like this. So unconditional positive regard, the clinician's unconditional positive regard for you incarnates the abyss-like infinite positive regard of God for you as the beloved. See? And the presence of the clinician then becomes an incarnate manifestation of the welling up of this depth dimension, that you're invincibly precious in all your wayward ways. Thomas Merton once says, "It is that in you that is not subject to the brutalities of your own will, for it is that in you that belongs entirely to God." And the clinician concretizes or sacramentally embodies that. You interpret it. Next, with empathy, is oneness with you, is God's infinite empathy with you. God, it isn't just that God's infinitely in love with you. It isn't that God's infinitely aware of who you are, but with infinite wisdom, God lovingly understands you through and through and through and through and through forever. And the clinician's presence to you incarnates or embodies that depth dimension like this. And self-congruence is truthfulness, compassionately stated. And you can be truthful with yourself. And what is the truthfulness with yourself? You're an infinitely precious broken person. And this infinite love for you permeates your brokenness through and through and through and through, and is with you in it unexplainably forever, like this. And so little by little then, there's different models or approaches to therapy which have this depth dimension, and sometimes the full implications of it is divine, are implicit. It's not explicitly stated. When I worked in therapy with people who would come to me, they were often adult survivors of trauma who wanted their spirituality to be a resource in their therapy. So they were looking for it to be stated explicitly, but sometimes it's implicitly there as a depth dimension. There are other approaches to this too, which is the healing effect of mindfulness, and a mindfulness training to practice mindfulness. And in the practice of mindfulness, if I sit and I become aware of what's arising within me, and as it arises within me, I don't try to change it. I try to understand it and accept it. That practicing this mindfulness allows me to contextualize my pain into broader frames of reference. And this can be measured in terms of brain activity and so on, greater contextualization of the suffering. But there's something else that happens in mindfulness. That in this whole healing process, and this goes on between any deep exchange with someone who loves you very much. It can also go on within yourself in meditation, the quiet hour at day's end, lying awake at night listening to your breathing. There's all these moments where you can feel you're descending down into a qualitatively deeper, more interior awareness of your oneness with qualitatively deeper, more interior dimensions of the abyss-like nature of your life. It's like a quickening in your heart, like a quietly abiding in something unexplainably that's touching you. And you can learn through meditation practice to cultivate that and stabilize in it and cultivate it. And therapy itself can become a context for it. So psychotherapy can become like meditation for two. The two people together are going down into this depth together. And this is why very often, if people see it all the way through, at the end of therapy, and the therapy ends, which is its own delicate thing because the relationship was so deep. It isn't just that you're less symptomatic than you used to be. One would hope so. But in the process, you were given something, that you matter. That you matter in a way that no one can ever take from you. And you can learn to live by that and to share that explicitly. And what's also very interesting is that, I put it also, is that I look at it poetically, how people experience this, is that in major deep depression or deep trauma, you can get so lost you can't even find yourself anymore in your own life, like you're in this darkness. But if you don't panic, and you sit in the dark and listen, this often takes the supportive presence of a person to be there with you in the dark, and you sit with the person, you can discover really that you're not alone in the dark, that a presence has come in looking for you, and really it was there all along and you couldn't recognize it, and it meets you in the dark, and is one with you in the dark, and it slowly leads you out of the dark into the light. And as you come back into the light again, you're so grateful to come full circle, but you know how important it is to bring with you out into the light what you learned in the darkness, about frailty, about fragility, about how precious we all are in our brokenness, about empathy, about not being presumptuous, about being sensitive and tender-hearted and real, where it becomes a transformative healing process like this, where spirituality and the psyche, the mind touch each other, like an incarnate infinity intimately realized, see, like this. And I think then, and I'll end on this note, that for anyone who's gone through major depression or through major trauma, there's like you come to a realization of something, and that is that life is on this earth is such that there is no place on this earth so pure or so innocent or so safe that the unfair, the cruel, and the destructive might not find you and bring you down. And that's really true. To be in a home where you were traumatized as a child, you're at home but you're not as safe in your own home. And sometimes you internalize you're not safe with yourself, like this. There is no place so secure that it cannot find you and bring you down. Happens a lot. This would be a recipe for despair if it wasn't for the fact that the suffering of this world, all the darkness of this world, has no refuge from a love that utterly transcends the darkness, permeates it through and through and through and through, unexplainably forever. And this is why I say God is a presence that protects us from nothing, even as it unexplainably sustains us in all things, on up to the moment of our death and beyond, like this. And we can learn to live by this light. And for Christian terms, this is Christ's life, really. That the life of Christ, the death of Christ, and the resurrection of Christ reveal to us our life, our death, and the light that shines out through that death unexplainably in the world. And so for me, I would say as a clinical psychologist working with trauma, and as a trauma survivor myself, is when I went to the monastery where my own trauma, I lived in silence, and I was so radicalized in silence in the presence of God. And then when I came out of the monastery, I found this bittersweet alchemy where my trauma and the presence of God kept touching each other and merging with each other. And that place is in all of us in different ways. And so how can we find someone to help us be present to that mysterious place within ourselves and learn to listen to it and walk with it day by day by day by day by day, like this. So that's my sense, I would say, on the spiritual dimensions of the healing of depression and all forms of suffering. Yeah.